Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist. Learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today I have the pleasure of talking to you about an app called LinguaSnapp. What is this app about, and what are the implications when it comes to ideology, particularly from a critical social linguistics perspective? Let's find out. Now, allow me to share the screen to begin this presentation. This is part of an academic presentation which I'm preparing for an upcoming conference, and the title is LinguaSnapp, Between Utopia and Dystopia, Mapping Linguistic Landscapes Through a Crowdsourcing Mobile App. Now, this is the table of contents. First, I will be addressing what exactly is LinguaSnapp, particularly if you're not familiar with it. Second, how does it work? Third, what are the ideological implications of this app? And here, I'm particularly interested in the tension between the extent to which the app allows for a visibilization of utopia in public space, on the one hand, and the extent to which it incurs in a potentially dystopian reappropriation of that public space. And lastly, I will be discussing a way forward in light of these dystopian dimensions. Now, what is LinguaSnapp? It's, long story short, a mobile app made to explore multilingual signs in urban landscapes. If you want a bit of more complex definition, you can say there is a crowdsourcing smartphone app devoted to the collection, the storage, and the analysis of linguistic landscape data, with a focus on urban settings as opposed to rural ones. A little bit of background for contextualizing purposes. LinguaSnapp was an original idea of Professor Yaron Matras, which he developed together with his team at the University of Manchester for 6 years between 2015 and 2021. And the goal was to create a multilingual landscape map of the city of Manchester, even though later on, the idea expanded into other cities across the world. So localized versions of the app have been produced not only for Manchester, as I said, but also for Jerusalem, Melbourne, St. Petersburg, Hamburg, Birmingham, and Tallinn in Estonia. This is what the website looks like in the case of Manchester. So here you can see a number of dots in different colors. The colors stand for languages and alphabets in which, at the point where the dot is placed, a multilingual sign existed, which was taken a snapshot and then uploaded to the centralized database of this app. So the main functions of LinguaSnapp are to examine the composition and role of multilingual signs, to analyze the relationship between different layers of multilingualism, such as demographics, alphabets, etc., and to study the link between multilingualism, community, and urban immigrants. How does it work? What if you were to download the app right now in your smartphone? What will you have to do? Now, the first step is to take a picture. Then, the app records your location to ascertain where the picture was taken. And then, you as a user can input optional information, including the language of the multilingual sign or languages of the multilingual sign you took a picture of, the location, which, as we've already established, has been ascertained by the app itself, but you can corroborate it as part of the metadata, and the translation of that sign into English, just in case not everybody understands the language or languages you took a picture of. Then the user uploads the picture, which is consenting implicitly to the fact that LinguaSnapp is going to publish that image on the website. The photo is transferred to the servers and is examined by the project team. And finally, the photo is deleted from the user's device. I think in new versions of this app, this no longer happens. But at any rate, those are the steps. Now, why is this interesting from an ideological standpoint? First, it has positive dimensions, utopian even possibilities. First, it clearly facilitates engagement via its crowdsourcing and open access features, meaning anybody, anywhere can download the app, install it, and take their own pictures and upload them to the cloud. And then they can also access them for free on the website. So that certainly boosts public engagement. On top of this, it also allows us to better understand the relationship between language repertoire and spatial demarcation. What people use what languages, how often within an urban setting. And it showcases, rather than telling, the vast linguistic diversity that there is on the ground, which contradicts or even undermines one state, one nation, one language ideologies and prejudices. In the words of Yaron Matras in The City as Multilingual Utopia, the ideological stances that accompany practice and reflection on multilingual spaces, as instantiated by this app in this case, represent notions of pluralism and transnational identities. They embrace symbols of belonging to a variety of places and practice communities. In this way, the city as an organic network of decentralized institutions accommodates practices and ideologies that differ from the prevailing one language nation state position. It develops its own city language narrative. Let's delve a little bit into these notions. I'm sure you're all familiar with this viral image. It was a graffiti made in North London. I was observed one day by Chris Walker, a local artist, and he reappropriated it by adding we before speak English, and then a number of languages that are actually still spoken in North London. And so you have this juxtaposition between the one nation, one language, one state injunction to speak English and just English, since you are in England. And on the other hand, this descriptive rather than prescriptive message of we at the beginning saying, this is not my country, this is not your country, this is not my language, it's not your language, it's not a matter of ownership. We collectively speak all of these languages as a matter of fact. This is the reality on the ground. Your willingness and anxiety to prescribe what language I should speak, and that I should only speak one language, in this case English, lets me know that the reality on the ground is much more complex. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so troubled by that you feel the need to write speak English in capital letters. Now, this app adds a twist to this message, because it's not only saying we speak this variety of languages, it is actually showing that is the case. And that's much more powerful. It's one thing to say it, there's one thing to tell it, there's another thing to show it with specific messages, in this case in Punjabi, in Polish, in Bulgarian, etc., written in that language, sometimes in alphabets that differ from the Latin alphabet. So for instance, in the case of Bulgarian, you could say Cyrillic, right? That is already powerful, because here the medium is the message, the language in which the message is written, the alphabet in which the message is written is already the multilingual message. It's already proven. It's already a specific, concrete proof of that multilingualism. So that's what this app does, which is great. The pros, in summary, are that this is a counter-propaganda by the deed, in practice, showing rather than telling, right? This is an incredibly positive way, I think, of visibilizing urban multilingualism in general, and in particular, apropos the so-called community language here ought to be understood by opposition to so-called modern languages, right? Which are just Western European languages plus Chinese and Arabic in practice. So community languages are those languages that are spoken on the ground every day, as a matter of fact, but are not deemed to be for the purpose of expanding the nation state's soft power. These are not profitable languages in the global market to the extent to which, say, English, Spanish, or French can be. So that exposes the one nation, one language rhetoric as ideological, and on the other hand, it simultaneously crafts a civic identity narrative that embraces local diversity, and that local diversity itself is a synecdoche for openness to the world, or world link, in the words of Müller. And that counter-propaganda by the deed is intrinsically tied to the so-called city language narrative, which is the result of repeating the city's multilingualism through these pictures of multilingual signs. Each time you see one of these pictures, it has a cumulative effect. So by the end of it, the message sinks that the city is incredibly multilingual, and that multilingualism is something that characterizes, that defines the city. Now, in the words of Matras, this constellation of agency, ownership, local responses at civic level, and pluralism of practice routines can be regarded as a decolonial enterprise, notwithstanding the absence of an overly formulated statement of aims that brands it as such. What does that mean? It means this is decolonialism in practice, even if it's not necessarily accompanied by a systematic theoretization of why is it decolonial. Again, showing rather than telling. On the other hand, and having reviewed all the positive/utopian aspects, there are also potentially dystopian features, which go as follows. First, the reviewing process involved in the functioning of this app includes a centralized committee of experts, which can restrict public outreach and innovation. Yes, there is public engagement, as we've seen. Lay people can take pictures and upload those. But at the same time, after uploading those pictures, the evaluation of the pictures is the sole province of a committee of academic experts. And so the very people who have taken those pictures oftentimes see their control and influence limited by this process. It also requires users, the people who took these pictures, to transfer copyright ownership to third parties. And those third parties can be problematic. Those third parties are universities and companies. Universities, which are under the influence of neoliberalism, and companies such as Google, or by extension, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Meta. Private companies, the so-called big tech companies, which have pretty much monopolized the internet, digital commons. So this transfer of copyright reinforces a double power imbalance, on the one hand, between lay people and academic researchers, and on the other hand, within the university, between faculty members and the managerial class, meaning the administration. In the words of Matras, there is a risk that the activist agenda, the utopian side of the app that we've seen, might become unsustainable as the neoliberal corporate university environment adopts quote-unquote diversity as a commodity and defaults to a stance that is shaped by colonial legacies. So let's delve a little bit here into what those colonial legacies look like and what diversity means in this context of commodification. Universities are often sites in which not decolonialism is not necessarily furthered in practice, but also colonial knowledge is produced and perpetuated. How so? For instance, through the stark division amongst disciplines and compartmentalization into silos, which reproduces predefined epistemologies. There is also the problem of neoliberal public management, which seems to grow larger by the day, turning research into a quantifiable commodity. And this is why some scholars like Neary have argued that no civic university or university social responsibility are oxymoronic. They serve to disguise the opposite of what they mean, or if you will, they mean the opposite of what they say. In the words of Matras, when nationalist positions, such as the association of languages with soft power, compete with the decolonial project over material resources and the authority to determine the content of public messages, the risk is that the decolonial project might run out of favor with the corporate management structure. Civic engagement for social justice and equality might then have to yield to the commodification of diversity for the sake of corporate branding. So whenever we have this tension between utopian and dystopian aspects, the risk is that those dystopian aspects might often prevail. And so here, now we're going to analyze the notion of diversity and why it can be reappropriated for reactionary purposes. Rebine makes this distinction between multilingualism on the one hand and linguistic diversity on the other. Multilingualism implies actively resorting to a repertoire of multiple languages, whereas linguistic diversity means representing difference, including functional specializations and hierarchical ordering. So insofar as that difference is hijacked by strict divisions and hierarchical ordering, it doesn't really further diversity, as its name will suggest, the opposite. So the term diversity, Schiller says, often serves as a trendy phrase within a neoliberal framework. It may serve to boost productivity, but it also serves to disavow the rights of various population groups to uphold their unique cultural traditions. This means that diversity serves to include minoritized population groups within an already neoliberal framework, so that rather than countering it, rather than abolishing it, it serves to perpetuate and to reproduce that neoliberal framework, thus defeating the whole purpose. And so this is how diversity can objectify communities, can essentialize them within a public engagement agenda, as observed by Campbell and Hewa. So what is the way forward in light of this tension between the utopian and the dystopian aspect, as well as the fact that the dystopian aspects do tend to prevail over the utopian potentialities of using this kind of app? Well, there are three aspects we need to consider, in my opinion: university, decentralization, and rights and policies. Now, here are some ways of improving the use of the app and similar resources at the university level. We can broaden the beneficiaries of research to encompass language users, practitioners, and policymakers. We can try and help breaking down barriers amongst disciplines, making for a more interdisciplinary research. And we can internationalize this project, including other cities, as it is the case with LinguaSnapp. However, even if all of those goals are met, there's still the question of whether universities pose a structural risk to these type of projects. In particular, to the sustainability of practical support, meaning once the funding dries up, can faculty still access that data set, which they themselves helped create? Is the data set preserved on an archive in the university or deleted? And who gets to make that decision under the supervision of who else? Which leads us to decentralization. Yes, universities may further a decolonial agenda, but it would be much safer if control over that data set generated with the app were in the hands of many more actors. That's why we need to create new forms of knowledge through exchange with stakeholders and to broaden the amount of people and actors and agents that can control the destiny of these data sets. And lest we forget, we should also bear in mind that celebration of multilingualism ultimately is the most powerful when it leads to meaningful policy changes. And so bottom-up multilingualism of the sort instantiated by this app ought to be thought as an issue of human rights. It is not only cool for me to use this community language, it is my utter right as a human being to use it. It's also a matter of pluralism and citizenship. And once we understand this, once we frame the question in this fashion, then we can influence domestic language policy. So that's all from me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, comments, please let me know down below. And as always, thanks for watching.